All right. Sorry, guys. Your wonderful MCA changed the password on me for YouTube, so I had to get that. So I'm sorry I'm starting a little bit late. Welcome, everybody. This is the contract series, part 2. We are going to be covering on today's day, we're going to be covering the we're going to be covering the listing agreement and supporting documents you need to take a listing here at KW Metro. But before we get started into the contracts, I just wanted to give my little, I get a lot of questions about listings, and I'd like to share my little story about, I remember my very first listing appointment. So if you've never had a listing, I remember mine. I was really excited. It was a referral, and the referral came through from a friend of mine. And here I was all excited. It was a like less than 5-year-old new build on San Diego Avenue. And it was a nice little townhome with an elevator in it. And I'm like, okay, I'm excited. I'm going to get my first listing appointment. And this was my very first one, and I had no idea what the hell I was doing. So I made up my little listing presentation, and I'm all geared up and got the appointment set, and I'm all ready to go down. And I bombed, royally bombed. And I didn't get the listing appointment. It actually went to more of a top agent in the market at that point. But I did learn a lot of lessons from it. And the biggest lesson I can really say is it wasn't so much about me doing a presentation, but it was more about me really sitting with the seller and saying, what is it you want? What are you looking for in an agent? Why are you selling your house? Where are you moving to? What happens if you don't sell your house? What do you like about, if you've sold a house before, what did you like about the process? What did you not like? What stressed you out? It was less about what you're going to do to market the house, but more about the seller's needs. And I think that's really important, whether you're dealing with a buyer or a seller or even an investor, is don't freak out about doing this fantastic presentation. It's not a presentation, it's a conversation. And a conversation is actually a two-way communication. So get really good at asking good questions. And the questions that are most important to me are, why are you selling your house? Where you want to move to? How soon you want to be there? Those are the top 3 questions. Why are you selling? Where are you moving to? How soon? So why you're selling is, you want to get to the understanding about why they are really selling their house. What's the purpose? Do they want to upsize, downsize, divorce? You got to understand that first. And then where you want to move to, are they going to be selling locally and then buying something locally? Remember, and this was a good lesson from an agent a couple of years ago. Broker Bob, I got my first listing. I'm really excited. We got it on the market, and then we got in an escrow, and then I found out that they were buying with another agent in the same area. So the home seller didn't know that our agent can actually help them buy too. So that's why you want to ask that question. And then how soon you want to be there is really going to kind of determine their level of motivation. Meaning, if they want to be sold in 30 days, they're going to be motivated to price it right. If they say we just want to test the market, if we sell it in 90, 100 days, that's okay. That's not a motivated seller. Motivated seller is that wants to sell it really, really fast because they want to move.
Can I add something to that, Robert?
Yeah.
So, to your first point where you were talking about it, it's not so much of a presentation as it is a conversation. That same thing happened to me, when I was practicing, and I had a referral from an agent, and the sellers were members of his church. He didn't really do listings and didn't even really represent clients, but he had a license. And so he, did the referral to me. And so it was an older couple, and we got together in their home, and we had like folding chairs in the living room, like kind of in a circle. And they seemed really nervous. And so I said to him, I had a portfolio with me and I said, well, I have this presentation I can go through if you really want me to, or I can just answer your questions. And that just completely put them at ease and just took all the tension out of the room, that they were not sure about and and it went very well. And I got the listing.
Yeah, because you
So,
built a relationship.
it's more about a conversation and not so much of a like formal presentation. And as we know, there's a lot of different personality types, and some people want that presentation and the statistics and all that kind of thing, and other people do not.
And you'll get that with my disc class that I'm teaching. I think it's next week or the week after. I teach about the behavior profile, is really understanding, because you're presenting to the behavior profile. You have to know what each person's behavior profile is in order to relate with them. And the other question that when I want to go back to the questions. The other question I always ask is, what happens if you don't sell your house? Now that gets missed a lot in some of the scripting from some coaches. But what happens if you don't sell your house? This is an important question, and probably the most important question, because this goes back to their pain. What is their pain threshold? Meaning, people will move towards pleasure and away from pain. So what happens if they don't sell their house would be, well, let's say they had to be to LA in 2 months because they start a new job and they have to be there in 2 months. Okay, great. So the pain is, if they don't get their home sold, they'll be in LA. They have to move to LA, which means they'll be either renting or buying up there and then having a mortgage on a house down here. You're there to help eliminate their pain. So you're always going to take them back to that pain when it comes to pricing, getting the home ready, etc., because they don't want that pain of sitting on 2 mortgages. And then the most important question is, do you want to hire me to be your agent? You got to ask that up front. Don't be afraid to ask that at the very first meeting. Do you want me to be your agent? They'll probably say, well, I don't know, we'll see at the end of this. But you're already setting the tone for you becoming their agent. Like, I'm going to help you sell this house no matter what. All right. So that's my little thing. And then, preparation for a listing appointment. We're going to go over the documents you're going to need, but someone asked me today, I'm like, take a notepad if you don't have a full-on presentation. Take a notepad and just ask questions and listen. The Ignite training materials has the questionnaire built within it. So the seller consultation questionnaire, take that, just ask those questions. Pricing's always asked about, what would you do for pricing? We played this game a few weeks ago on pricing of properties. It was one after one of the team meetings, and I think Nikki Francis, who I see is on the call, she won. I was right behind her though, Nikki, just FYI. And pricing a property in this market, who the hell knows? I mean, really, who the hell knows? Buyers are freaking crazy today. And I remember when I first got in my first year, one of the top agents in my office, they were talking about pricing, and another agent was asking her, where do you think I should price this property at? And this agent had sold a lot of Mission Hills homes. She goes, I don't know in this market. Pricing is more of a strategy. When you're strategizing where you're going to position it on the market, as opposed to a determination of value. Pricing is more of a strategy than a determination of value. In other words, the market's going to determine the price, where it's going to go in the market. The definition of market value is what a buyer's willing to pay and what a seller's willing to accept. What a buyer's willing to pay and what a seller's willing to accept. Pricing is a strategy as opposed to a determination of value, because a strategy is, do you want to get a lot of people to look at your home, or do you want a certain amount of people to look at your home, or do you want nobody to look at your home? Think of it as an auction. The more people you get to come in and see the property, that's got this effect about, ooh, everybody wants this. I need to make an offer on it. And back in the days when we had physical open houses, there were 50 people out front for this house when it was first day open house. That means everybody wants that property. And if it's priced competitively and people see it as a good deal, then the market will react. It has nothing to do with the agent or the buyer or the seller, but the market. The market will react to a competitive price as opposed to something that is set uh, by a seller who says, well, we really have to get this. And it really is below that. And put the seller in the eyes of a buyer when you're talking about pricing and say, you know, I want you to think about as you're a buyer right now. You're going to go out and we're going to sell this and you're going to buy your replacement property. Are you going to want to overpay for that property? Well, of course, the answer is no with that seller. If they're going to buy a replacement, they're going to want to pay, you know, they're going to want a good deal too. And I'm like, buyers are thinking the exact same thing with you as well too. So we're going to position your home however you want to, but we're going to make sure that we position it so you get the most amount of eyes on the property. And you never, ever, ever pick the price. You just recommend. You know, do they want to be competitive, middle of the road, or have it possibly sit on the market? And it's their determination where it goes on the market. And then that way, when it hits the market, and let's say if it doesn't sell, let's say it sits, then they can't point the finger at you. But if you say, let's put it at X and it sits there, then they're pointing the finger at you. So always remember that. Budget about $500 for every listing if you're a brand new agent, never had a listing. So that's going to include your lockbox. It'll include any marketing you do. No flyers right now because you still can't deliver flyers during COVID. You can do a mailer if you want around the neighborhood, but I would spend more money on digital marketing as opposed to physical marketing. And then the cost of a sign, you can have a sign in the yard if it's a house. If it's a condo, you have to make sure with the condo association, does the condo association want to allow a sign in their building? Does it have to be within the unit? Can it face in the window facing the street? There are very few condo buildings that will allow a sign in the front yard. You just need to know from the HOA if that's allowed. And then preparing the home for sale, just always remember, if you've ever toured a new home model, you know, builders do a really good job making it look really good. So you've got to make that house sparkle. And, you know, if the sellers are moving, you know, have them start packing. If they got a lot of clutter, have them get rid of that clutter. You got to make it light and airy and get rid of all the clutter because they're moving out. And a buyer walking in has to envision themselves living in the home. So if you got a seller that has all of his family pictures and heirlooms and trophies from their college track days, they are going in a box because no buyer's going to come in and envision living in that home with all those trophies around. So just have them, and that will help them in their mindset to get ready. Oh, okay, we're excited now. We're going to get this home sold and go buy our next one. So there's a lot of psychology in that as well too. So those are my tips for that. I hope that was helpful. Let's get into the documents you guys are going to start needing. So you all have access to your zip forms and you've all logged into your zip forms. And by the way, if you have questions, this is interactive, so feel free to ask questions. The chat box is open. Yeah, Nikki wrote in the chat box, pricing is more of a strategy than a determination of value. Awesome. And it was really funny because, the other thing about pricing is not only a science, but an art. So remember that, a science and an art, meaning scientifically, you go through determination price per square foot, et cetera, et cetera. And then the art is actually, you have seen enough homes on the market that you can kind of, in your own mind, come up at where you think it's going to be because you've gone out and looked at the property. So when I was a brand new agent, I was on Caravan every week, twice a week, and just wanted to walk in and kick the tires and see the houses and see what they had for sale. Okay, so let's talk about listings at KW Metro. In our zip forms, we have the templates preloaded. So when you go create a new listing, you'll put in the seller and the address, however you want to name the document. And then all the documents that are required to be in for compliance will automatically load in there. And some will be in a PDF and some will be in a placeholder. So 99.9% of the listings you're going to take in this will be the exclusive listing agreement. Updated 6/20. Is that right, Mark?
I believe that's correct. The newest one is from June of 2020.
Yeah. Okay. So 6/20. Other listing agreement you'll have in there is the lease listing agreement. That would be if you want to take a residential lease and help the owners find a tenant. And that's a very simple process. You're just doing a lease listing, putting it on the MLS and offering a commission like you would a sale. But you're not doing property management. You're just promoting it. And we don't have a compliance review for that. So you won't need to do nothing more than just do the lease listing, put it on the MLS, get the pictures, and then accept it, whatever commission you work out with the owner. And then there's a probate listing addendum that is added to a probate listing, which is now included in the residential listing agreement. And if you have an opportunity for a probate, that's a little bit more of a sale that not everybody can do. You'd have to team up with someone that understands probate. And then REO listing, if we ever get into that market, we have an REO listing advisory. And then the other, and then that's it for the listing. Oh, and then a vacant land listing agreement. So vacant land, we allow most of you to do a vacant land, meaning a lot for sale. You know, if you have a residential lot that somebody wants to be able to sell, you can take a listing like that. But if it's a big plot of land, let's say a developer type land that like 20, 40, 50 acres, well, that's a specialty and that's really more of a commercial application, because with a vacant land on a size of land like that is you really need to understand all the environmental studies and coastal regulations and sand ag requirements if a developer is attempting to build on that. And all that stuff will need to be packaged up, and the commercial team knows how to do that. So just know if you ever get an opportunity for a vacant lot, go ahead. A vacant land, refer to the commercial team so they can take care of it.
Can I add something to that, Robert?
Yes.
Vacant land listings. Check some other vacant land listings in the MLS, because typically the commissions on vacant land listings are higher than they are on residential properties. So you might go into the MLS and look at some vacant land listings or the history of vacant land listings and find that they are 10% commission, or whatever number they might be, and you could use that as the basis for proposing a commission rate to a seller, because usually the commission rates are higher for vacant land than they are for resale residential. The other form that was in that list of listing forms was a manufactured home listing agreement, and we do have a global template for. Can you go over to templates real quick on your screen up at the top there? Just click on templates. There, we do have a predefined template for a number of different types of listings and purchase transactions, and you'll see there's a purchase agreement, single family purchase agreement. The second one, or the to the right, is condominium. Then there's listing agreement, single family, listing agreement, condominium, a referral template, purchase agreement template, purchase agreement multi-unit. We don't have one specifically for manufactured homes. If you were going to do a manufactured home, you do a listing agreement single family, and you would add the manufactured home agreement to it. There's not a specific template for that. And then the other two that say use to apply folders, you can just disregard those. You never really need to use those.
Thanks, Mark. Okay, so let me get back into the transaction. So you've created your seller transaction, and let's talk about the forms. So on your right-hand side, of each transaction, you'll see where it says all forms up here on the top right where I have my cursor. I'm going to open up that bar, and this is your library of all the forms you guys have access to. So there's the car forms, American Home Shield, car sample letters, etc., foreclosure, open house forms. This right here at the very bottom, San Diego risk management forms, these are forms specific to your association, SDAR. And SDAR has put together a form called risk management forms. And one of the forms in there is called the SLIC, S-L-I-C. And it's the seller's listing information checklist. So I'm going to go in and show you what that form is. And why you need to have this with your opening documents. So we're going to review all the opening documents you need for every listing. So when you take a listing and you get all the documents, you're going to upload it into Command, create an opportunity, put it into Command, and do what's called an initial review. That's where it's sent to Mark, and Mark reviews. So any transaction, a purchase transaction and a listing transaction. The BRE doesn't start with a review, the one we did on Tuesday. Don't need a review on that, but you need an initial review on any new listing and any new purchase agreement. Reason being is Mark's got to go in and see the listing and make sure, because the broker has the final authority as to whether or not we keep the listing, and 99.999% of the time we do. But he's got to verify that if everything's been filled out properly, especially in the listing agreement, if it was in a trust, not in a trust, getting the right person to sign it. By the way, Mark, on risk management call yesterday, one of the main questions was, how do we train agents to use the RCSD? And Spencer, you'll like this. Spencer Lugash said that, you know, he is always amused with when an agent says, I have been in this business for 30 years and I've never been asked to fill out an RCSD. So I thought you get a kick out of that one. Not just us, Mark.
It's just, you know, it's kind of interesting because, you know, for a long time, I thought that escrow would be a check and balance for us. Like if you, you know, if you got a purchase contract or any contract, a purchase contract, I guess would be appropriate, and you sent it, and the seller or buyer had signed with an X, and you send it to escrow, their position is, hey, if the brokerage has okayed this contract, we're going to open escrow. You know, for a long time, I thought they'd kick it back and they'd say, that's not a valid signature. Like it says the ABC Trust instead of the person's name, you know, the representative's name. But they say, no, if your brokerage says it's okay, we're going to process it. So they're not a check and balance in that regard for us.
So sorry about this, guys. I tried to open a document and now.
Which one were you trying to open there? What?
Never mind, I fixed it. Mark, do you have the document how to take a listing in a trust?
I think I could find that.
Okay.
On this, I'd like to just mention on this SLIC that a lot of agents I talk to, listing agents, they say, well, do we have to do that? And you know, the answer is, well, you don't have to do anything. You know, it's probably a good idea if we recommend it. And the reason that we recommend it is because this gives you a tremendous amount of information from the seller about different things, like maybe there's 2 HOAs on the property that you're selling, or maybe they own it in conjunction with someone else and only one of the 2 people that own it are there tonight. So, you know, for the listing appointment. So there's a lot of really good information on this form, and the pushback I hear from listing agents is, well, I don't want to burden, you know, the seller with all that stuff at the listing appointment. And I'm like all for you walking out the door with a signed contract, so to speak, you know, when we could meet with sellers face to face and not burdening them with a lot of paperwork. But this is a good document to just leave behind, like the TDS and the SPQ and some other disclosures. You know, you can just say, look, you're going to need to give these back to me in a day or 2. So please take a look at them at your convenience and complete them and so forth. But you know, I'm all in favor of getting the listing agreement signed and not, you know, overburdening the seller, but don't think of this as a prerequisite to the listing agreement, but it is a really good tool to use to give you information about the sale.
So let me review. Mark, if you can look for the trust listing, I'd appreciate that and drop it in the chat box.
There's something going on with your Zoom session. It's bouncing at the bottom there, which means it wants your attention.
I know. I don't know why it's doing that. Disregard what I just sent in the chat box. Anyway, so the seller's listing information checklist is information from the seller. You're not filling this out, the seller is. The seller's representation of everything they know about their property. So title, loans and obligations, homeowners association, tenant and property, pest control inspections, any reports they have, square footage, and special showing conditions. So let me explain where this comes into play and why it's important that you have this so you understand. Loans and obligations. This happened a couple of years ago, which is why we implemented this checklist to be part of the opening documents. We had an agent took a listing. The seller said that she only owed X amount of dollars on it. Agent takes a listing, gets it into escrow. The escrow orders a payoff demand, finds out that actually the amount of money owed is more than what the owner thought. So now what's happened is the owner was short about $8,000 in order to pay off all the proceeds, and she would have to come up with $8,000, or she couldn't close escrow. Well, the problem is she was in escrow with a buyer that was demanding she perform and close escrow. So she was in breach of the agreement, the seller was. And then I asked the agent, did you get a slick filled out? And they said no, but she told me she owed X amount of dollars. I'm like, well, great. But you know, she could have a claim against you because you basically took her word for it and didn't protect her and put a home on the market for, you know, what you thought was market value. And now she's coming up and she can't close escrow because she doesn't have the $8,000 to pay. Well, through all the negotiation and everything, our agent, you know, always wanted to do the right thing, came up with $6,000 out of his pocket so she can close the escrow on the home and the buyer can get the home. So really, it's a protection for you guys that a fiduciary the seller would not have anything to come back on you and say, I never told you that. No, you did tell me that. And one of the big things that comes up, and this has happened twice in the last year, is homeowner associations. There have been escrows that we have closed that, and for whatever happened through the escrow process, a second HOA was not discovered. And escrow missed it, title missed it. The last one, escrow missed paying the second HOA all the monthly fees that they were supposed to collect from the buyer. And the buyer does, you know, rents out the house for 30 days to the seller, then moves into the property, and then starts getting all these late notices from this other HOA they knew nothing about. Well, they were disclosed on the MLS that there were 2 HOAs, but the escrow missed the second HOA. Having this would make sure that when you take the home to market, that you are actually presenting everything that the seller says. Yes, here's the HOAs and here's who they are. So then that buyer would not have a claim against you and us, the broker, that we did not disclose and we intentionally hid something. So when we use this forms, it's not because we want another form, it's actually to prevent if we ever get into a lawsuit or we have to make a claim or defend something, we have our paperwork really tight, and we pretty much end up prevailing in most of our cases. Matter of fact, Mark, on that last DRE complaint, we prevailed because our files were so tight that they said no further investigation is necessary. Because people will always make a claim against something for non-disclosure. Okay, so risk management, the SLIC form is one of the forms you're going to have filled out. The other form that you will, when you submit initial review, will be the MLS all fields report. The MLS all fields report is once you put it into the MLS, you're going to get that report and print it up, and you're going to actually have your seller, you're going to send your seller a copy of it. And that's basically to verify that the information you've put in the MLS is accurate. So you send it to the seller and say, please review the MLS entry that I put into the MLS and make sure that I've gotten all the information correct from what you know it. Room dimensions, square footage, stuff about the property, because that's the seller's valid verification that yes, you have put everything right in the MLS. And let's say that post-close that there's a square footage issue where the property was put in the MLS and it was the wrong MLS, it was the wrong square footage. Yet on the SLIC, you got the information from the seller that it had this square footage. You were just going off the information from the seller. So the seller, it would be hard for the seller to make a claim against you that you made a mistake. And so the MLS all fields report is a checks and balances to make sure everybody got the right information. And then you're also going to have the seller sign your comparative market analysis, your CMA. You're going to have them sign that at the same time they sign the listing agreement digitally. And that's the valid verification that the home is priced at the market, and there can be no confusion afterwards if there was ever a claim. And then the estimated seller proceeds. So that's basically a net sheet, and you can get those made from escrow. They're very good at helping you make net sheets, and they're going to need certain bits of information. They'll let you know what they need. But the net sheet is what the seller will put in their pocket that will prevent a post-close claim when they come back to you and say, I got less money than I thought I was going to get. You never told me there was going to be this fee, or you never told me I'd have to pay this fee. So it's not 100% accurate, but it's at least another spot to say, hey, yes, Mr. Seller, we gave all this information to you. So it just helps our case.
Can I add a couple points on that, Robert?
Yeah.
So on the Paragon all fields report, I learned recently that not all MLSs have an all fields report. Now, probably all of you, 90% of you are going to be doing business in SDMLS with Paragon. But in Palm Springs, for example, they do not have an all fields report. So you obviously wouldn't be able to print one and have the buyer sign it or the seller sign it. But the whole point of that is just to verify that the data entry was done correctly. And especially if you're going to delegate data entry into the MLS, like into an assistant or a TA, that's helping you, you want to make sure that the data was entered correctly. And it may also prompt the seller to say, oh, no, the HOA fee just went up. It's like 160 now and not, 150 or whatever the numbers are. And then on the estimated seller's proceeds, there is a CAR form that you can fill out, a template that you can complete, and you can do it yourself. Or you can ask a title company or escrow company to do it for you. And A+ escrow will do that for you. The important point of all of these documents, CMA and ESP, the estimated seller's proceeds, is that they're given to the seller before they sign the contract, so that you can, or concurrent with when they sign the contract, so that they can't say, well, you never advised me about that. And like the cool thing about using the CAR estimated seller's proceeds form is that it has a list of all these various costs that can be associated in a contract. And even if you don't fill them all in, just by the fact that you've given that seller that form that had those possible costs on it, you've advised them that that potentially was going to be a cost of their sale. You may not have known about it when you prepared the form, but that's why it's called an estimated seller's cost, not a carved in stone seller's cost, you know? So that, keep that in mind, is that, you know, there may be some costs that, you know, certain fees and things like that that come up that, you know, there's a space for them on the car estimated seller proceeds form, but even if they're blank, at least you still advise the seller that it's a possibility they might be charged that fee.
So I put all those forms in the chat box, and Mark brings up a point where he says, well, you never told me. So this is where agents get in trouble. This is where they get cases against them, where a buyer or seller will say, your agent never told me. That's their excuse. And the way we cover our tracks is effective documentation that we showed them where we told them. Matter of fact, the case I was just selling that we were absolved from the DRE, we had documentation that showed all along the way where this seller knew exactly where we told them, yet they were trying to say that we didn't. And so we presented all that evidence and we prevailed on it. So that's really what risk management is about, is to prevent those people from saying, well, you never told me that. Okay.
Can I ask one other thing out? Just a question for everybody that's on the call. Who all knows what RPR is? Realtor Property Resource, and have you set up an account?
Yes.
So some are saying yes, some say yes. Anybody who hasn't, it's a NAR, is it a NAR benefit or a CAR? I think it's a NAR benefit.
NAR.
National Association of Realtors benefit. And you can do some great research on properties in RPR and take those to your listing appointment and create CMAs and create all these different property profiles and learn how a property is vested, title is vested. So if you haven't looked into RPR, check that out. It's a Realtor Property Resource is the name of it. And I think is it Robert, is it rpr.com?
Or you can access it through SDMLS.
Through the SDMLS dashboard? Okay.
Yeah, the dashboard. Okay.
Yeah, that's a handy tool.
So then now, before you go to your listing appointment, you got to make sure you're going to pull the property, the tax record, and see who owns the little puppy. Okay. And if you'll see if the home is owned in what we call a trust, or the name of a trust, or maybe a corporation or an LLC, it'll show that on the tax records. It won't be just Joan Smith or Harry Smith or Bob Jones. It'll show the words like trust or something within the tax record as the owner. And if that's the case, you're going to have to take a form called the RCSD-S. RCSD-S, and that is the representative capacity signature disclosure.
Everybody's saying, well, what the heck is that? What does that mean? But, you know, essentially it's pretty simple. It just means that someone is acting as a representative for the actual seller, who actually owns the property. A corporation, an LLC owns it, or a trust owns it. And the representative is the person who can sign on behalf of that entity.
Meaning they have the authority to sell it.
Yeah, correct.
Well, if it's in a trust, you need to make sure you talk to the seller and say, great, I see your property's in a trust. I will need something within the trust, and it's called an abstract of trust. Abstract of trust. And that is one page. They're not going to give you the whole trust, but you need to see that one page within the trust. And within that one page, it basically shows who has the authority to sign for the trust. And if you don't have the person that really has the authority, you don't have a valid listing agreement.
So this again gets a little complicated because a trust is a private document, and a lot of people who have trusts don't want to just like give it to you. They probably have to give it to escrow because escrow needs to see the full document and any revisions or amendments to it that exist. But an abstract of trust is just a portion of the trust that says this person is empowered to buy and sell real estate on behalf of this thing, trust, corporation, LLC. So not everyone has, I mean, in a corporation LLC, you would not have an abstract of trust. You would only have an abstract of trust for a trust. Does that make sense? But these other documents, the operating agreement of an LLC and the articles of incorporation for a corporation would show who is able to sign on behalf of the corporation or LLC to sell that property.
And that's just a one-page letter that shows that they've been given the authority to do it.
Yeah, be careful because if you have a corporation or an LLC that has multiple members or officers, they may have to have a resolution, a consensus of all the owners that say, yeah, this person can sign on behalf of it. And that can really mess up a deal if you don't have that. So it's worth doing your homework ahead of time, asking some of these questions.
And it's important to know if it's in a trust because you don't want to take a listing with just somebody's name and you find out later it's in a trust and they don't have the authority and then you don't have a listing. So you've gone to all this time, energy, and effort and you're all excited and you find out the listing's invalidated.
I put a link in the chat, Robert. That's the link to the assessor's website. It's https://iwrsdttc. Everyone can see it, I think. It's time stamped at 2:39. If you click on that, it'll take you to the assessor's website where you can put in an APN or you can put in the address and you can find out, see a copy of the tax bill and you can see how the vesting is on there. If it says trust or corporation or anything, then you know that you need to be prepared for that. If it just says John and Mary Smith, then those are individuals that hold it title. That's a handy link to bookmark and use when you're preparing for a listing appointment.
Kelly Lou asked, would it be easier to have them take it out of the trust first? Yeah, they could just take that one page and copy it and just attach it to the slick.
Maybe she means take the property out of the trust before.
Oh, take it out of the trust.
That's probably not simple to do.
Yeah.
It's probably not something that they want to do.
All right, so the types of listing agreements then, we're going to use the RLA, the exclusive, which is, it's not showing the updated one in here.
Why don't you just start a new transaction? Just exit out of this one and just start.
Yeah, but I want to make a point here. There is a listing called an open listing agreement, which we don't do at our brokerage because an open listing basically, will you explain it, Mark, while I do this, remove it?
An open listing, yeah, that's basically, a situation where you just put something in the MLS, a property for sale in the MLS, and then you have nothing more to do with it. The people that are interested in buying it contact the seller directly, and we don't do open listings or limited listings. We just do the exclusive agency listings only, and that is not necessarily so much a brokerage policy decision as it's driven by errors and omissions insurance coverage, where those other types of transactions are more risky, and some real estate agents do that, and I say real estate agents because realtors probably don't do it, but we just do not do anything other than the residential listing agreement exclusive. So you would never use any other form, other than that one, other than the residential listing agreement exclusive.
All righty. There we go. They just updated this form, so I didn't update my thing. Okay. So within the RLA, we have preloaded all the forms you're going to need to take the listing. In addition to the ones that we dropped into the chat bar, you're going to need those to open the transaction at Metro. But the first form obviously is agency disclosure. So typically, and we talked about agency on Tuesday's call, I'm not going to go into the AD form again today, because if you want to see explain agency, go back to that call. It's already uploaded to YouTube. But you will have them sign the agency disclosure when you take the listing, first form. And then also within the contract documents is the PRBS, possible representation of more than one buyer or seller. And this basically is a disclosure to the seller that, hey, we're going to list your home, but we might list other homes too in the neighborhood. And just to put you on notice, and we're probably going to work with multiple buyers too. Matter of fact, those buyers might even come for our brokerage. So we're just putting you on notice that we will have other clients that we work with, maybe your neighbor down the street, up the street. But we're going to keep your stuff confidential. Okay, so that's really what the PRBS does. Okay. And then the wire fraud and electronic funds transfer advisory. You will hear a lot about escrow when they present at our office about wire fraud, because it's on the rise, especially now, even more so during COVID. As we deal in a digital currency world where funds are transferred electronically, there are a lot of bad actors out there that are attempting to steal people's hard-earned money. So as a fiduciary, as a real estate agent, your job is to protect your principals. And one of the big things that's on the rise right now with wire fraud is making sure that your principals are safeguarded with their money if they're going to be wiring any money in. Now, the wire fraud happens more on the buy side when a buyer will wire money in, but you also need to put the seller on notice about it too, to be responsible to them as well. And so that's what the wire fraud and electronic funds transfer does. And this isn't a form you just gloss over when you're having them sign. You actually explain to them. And again, anytime you have something within a contract that is bolded, that means that's the important part. And you just basically talk about wire fraud and safety and security and making sure that, they're not, one of the biggest ways that people are getting wire fraud. So your computers at home are already hacked. You may not know it, but it's hacked by, a lot of it's coming out of China and Russia. If you've ever downloaded something by accident, you've got spyware within your computer. That's why it's really probably pretty important for you to put something over the video capture, the camera portion of your screen, because they can see you. But these Russian hackers are already within your computer, and what they do is they reside in your computer, and they know you're a real estate agent because you guys do a lot of advertising and marketing on social media. Oh, look at my new buyer. Look at the new seller I got. Look at the new home I got my buyers in. They see stuff like that, and then they've hacked in your computer, and they're sitting in the background waiting for you to start communicating back and forth to your principals. And one of the things they do is they find out all the contact information from every principal, because you have so many emails going back and forth. And that's how they finally get you. For a buyer, is what they'll do, something like this, is they will email, let's say you're getting close to close and the buyer has to wire their remaining funds to close escrow in time. And they know that because they see the contracts within your email. And all of a sudden your buyer gets an email that looks like it's coming from you that will say, hey, Joe, it's Robert. I just got a call from escrow. They need to get your remaining funds wired today. Here's the wiring instructions. Oh, by the way, I'm in a class until noon, so I can't talk until after then, but they need to have it in there by 10 o'clock in the morning. And then the buyer thinks that's coming from you. Like, okay, so they deposit the rest of their funds, and all of a sudden it's not really where it's supposed to be going. So that's how wire fraud happens. And that's a real story you can bring up when you're talking about wire fraud with a buyer and seller, about how they should do those 5 things that are bolded there. Obtain phone numbers and account numbers only from escrow officers at the beginning of the transaction. Do not ever wire electronically unless you call to confirm.
Right.
Orally confirm the transfer instructions is legitimate and confirm the bank routing number. Avoid sending personal information in emails or texts. So you don't want to send your login ID and passwords via email or text. And take steps to secure the system you're using with your email account. Now, we all use, a majority of us, hopefully you're using the KW platform, or if you're using Gmail, great. You can use your Gmail, but you need to have two-step encryption, two-step verification in place. Two-step verification means if you ever need to log into your Gmail from another computer that Gmail doesn't recognize, they will send a code back to your cell phone that you've already predetermined for you to input. You've all come across that already. You're probably seeing a lot of two-step verifications for most of the websites you get into right now, so you're aware of it. So if you don't know how to set up two-step verification on your email, go to Google and Google how to set up two-step verification on my Gmail. And they'll give you step-by-step instruction on how to do that. And if you really want to take it to another level, let's say you have a domain name, like I have robert@robertshantz.com. And then I have that account, not for business, but for something else. I could get encryption software from Google that's like $100 a year that will encrypt every email going through that. So that's another way to encrypt your emails. Okay.
You know, you on the subject of the escrow officer, you could, you know, if you're working with an escrow officer all the time, get some of their business cards and give one of those cards to your buyer and say, here's their information. And if you happen to get an email that asks you to do something, call the number on this business card. Don't call the number or click on a link in the email to verify that that email is legitimate. So
there was a recent wire fraud in Carlsbad within about 5 months ago, and the buyers lost like $800,000. And guess who they're suing? They're suing the broker, i.e. the agent. Okay. So here's your residential listing agreement. You're going to come in and fill it out, and the seller is going to be Joe Seller. Oops. I don't know what that is.
What
is that?
There's a, you know, a second of seller 3 and 4 fields. Like, you know, you'd use the ones that are on line 1, but if you had more, they've, you know, given you the ability to add more now.
That was the update, right?
I think that's been there for a while prior to the 620 update.
Okay. So hereby employees and grants, and it's Keller Williams Realty, San Diego Metro. It's not your name. We're the broker. I'm the broker. So put that. Okay. And the beginning date, whatever date you're going to use, we're going to do today's date. And then the length of the listing. And we talked about periods for having a BRE. This is also periods for taking a listing agreement. Most people will do 6 months as a listing agreement. So that will take this one out to January 9th of 2021. So that gives you 6 months to sell that property. And then you can take a listing for, you know, one of the tactics we're using in a low inventory market, short inventory market, with maybe for sale by owners that don't really want to list for 6 months. Say, you know what, give me a listing for a weekend. You can take it for a weekend. You're going to do a lot of work in that weekend, but if you get it sold in that weekend, you can take it for a weekend. And then you're going to put in the address, and situated in San Diego City, San Diego County, and then the zip code, and then the assessor parcel number, which is found where? I agree with you, Carmen. Google is literally your best, why don't I say best friend? Let's say Today's encyclopedia.
The APN number could be found on that link that I provided on that tax assessor's website. Well, maybe it cannot be found there.
Well, it's going to be on their CRS data sheet that they've pulled to see who the hell owns the property.
Yeah, and it would also be in the MLS for the listing there.
Yeah, so in your MLS, you'll see CRS data, tax information. You go in there, plug in the address, and it will have the APN number, which you double check to make sure you put the right APN number in that field. And then also you're checking ownership at that time. And these boxes over here, this property is a manufactured mobile home, which it isn't. And this property is being sold as part of a probate, conservatorship, or guardianship, which it isn't. But if you did, it would auto load the addendums that Mark and I were talking about earlier. Okay. And I don't know if this address is a condo or not. I can't remember. But we're gonna go it's a house. Okay. And then listing price shall be $850,000. And then listing terms could be anything additional that you might want to have. Mark, what have you seen on some of the listing agreements? Anything?
For additional listing terms, yeah, I mean, there's things get put in there. Like, for example, there might be some discounts put in there.
Well, that should go into compensation.
Yeah, it sometimes gets put in the wrong place. Additional listing terms could be, like you could maybe build in a price reduction schedule. Like if the seller is asking for a lot more than what the CMA shows that is the market value for the home, you could say, look, okay, I'll list it for you at that price. But if we don't get any offers in 2 weeks, we will reduce it to this price. And then if there's no offers, then we'll reduce it to this price after 2 weeks. So sometimes in 2B, you'll see clauses where agents will say, price to be reduced by $25,000 if no offers after 2 weeks, or, something like that.
That was it. Okay. Sorry, I had to get my brain working. A lot going on in here today, but Mark makes a good point. If you're taking a listing and you know it's overpriced and the seller's adamant at doing it at a certain price, in your listing terms, this is where you will add something on the 21st listing price to be reduced, or listing price to be X dollars on such and such date if no offers. So you could do it. You can do an automatic price reduction in the listing terms in this section. Okay, and it's a really good idea to. And we never use the word. Never use the word price reduction with the seller. That's like nails on a chalkboard with the seller. We're just going to modify it to modify the price to match existing market. Modify the price to match it to the existing market, or enhance the price.
There's a good term for that. I think Claudine used it. I can't remember what it is. Price enhancement or price.
They're all price enhancements. Then section 3 is all about compensation. So compensation section A talks about the full listing broker commission, which you're always going to take all your listings at 6% because you guys are worth 10. Where this 5% came about, I'll never know. I think agents work really hard. They deserve 10. But for this example, we're going to take a full 6%. By the way, I don't think I ever took a listing for less than 6%, even in a fast market. Or you could do a dollar amount. But right now we're going to, and most dollar amounts would be if it's a mobile home, because you'd never take 6% of a mobile home that was $100,000. You'd be working for peanuts. Most mobile homes would be, $20,000 to sell. So you could do a dollar amount, and could be a section where you could add, let's say they want to pay a bonus to an agent buyer's agent, if they bring an offer within the, get it into escrow and it sells within, 30 days or 20 days, you could define that term right here where they pay, you say, and $5,000 for buyer's agent's bonus. So you could list that in there.
Another use for 2B would be, I've seen agents where the seller was really tight on money, and the 2B was used for the listing agent to say that they would pay for the property inspection, or they would pay for some service like staging or something like that, and that the seller would reimburse them at close of escrow. So 2B could be used for some options like that.
Mm-hmm.
If you have that situation come up, reach out to us and ask for help on what's the best way to word it.
So section 3A1, if during the listing period or any extension, broker, cooperating broker, seller, or any other person procures a ready, willing, and able buyer whose offer to purchase the property on any price and terms is accepted by seller, provided the buyer completes the transaction or is prevented from doing so by seller. Broker is entitled to compensation whether any escrow resulting from such offer closes during or after the expiration of the listing period or any extension. So what does this mean? So we take the listing, we've got a valid listing, and we produce what's called a ready, willing, and able buyer on any price and terms that is acceptable to the seller. But let's say the seller says, I'm not going to pay you because I knew this buyer. We're going to sell it to this buyer anyway because I'm not going to pay you. That's basically what protects us from getting the money if the seller ever does this. And this was the paragraph that we used in mediation once with a seller, with one of our agents that took a listing, and it was within their own networking group, and it was the husband of the person didn't want to pay our agent because the buyer came from within that networking group. So they felt that because they already knew that buyer, that they didn't need to pay us for the listing. So that's what we went to mediation for and prevailed. So that's what protects us to make sure we get your commission. Item 2, or within, and I was always trained to put 180 days, but I'm going to put 90 days. If within 90 calendar days after the end of the listing period or any extension, or after any cancellation of this agreement, unless otherwise agreed, sellers enters into a contract to actually sell the property. So what does this paragraph mean? Let's say that the listings expired and you did a 3-month listing, it expired on the 3rd month, and then on the 3rd month and the 10th day after that, the seller actually ends up going into escrow and selling to somebody that was introduced to the property during the listing period. With this paragraph, we would be able to go back and collect the money, the commission owed by that seller, because that buyer came during our listing period and we physically showed that buyer, or an offer was written by that buyer, etc. So here's kind of how it plays out in real life. It's the 3rd month, the last day of the listing, a buyer comes in with you, or an agent brings a buyer in the property, and the seller's there and you're there, and the seller sneakily goes to the buyer and say, hey, my listing actually expires tomorrow with this broker. Why don't you come back to me tomorrow when it expires, and we'll just work directly together, and I'll give you a deal on the property. And then the next day after the listing expires, the buyer decides to come back and they consummate a transaction and they're in escrow. And next thing you know, they close escrow with a buyer we introduced. Now we can go back and get that. We can legally get that. We can prove that the seller owes that money in court. So we will prevail. However, the very last sentence here. Seller, however, shall have no obligation to broker under paragraph 3A2 unless not later than the end of the listing period or any extension or cancellation, broker has given seller a written notice of the names of such prospective buyers. So, which is why it's very important that you give a notice to all the seller of every buyer that came in that property. So it's a really good idea to take notes. Oops. Sorry. And then item 3, if without broker's prior written consent, the property is withdrawn from sale, conveyed, leased, rented, otherwise transferred, or made unmarketable by a voluntary act of seller or any extension. So if the seller decides to withdraw it and put it into withdraw status, but they end up selling it to someone, we could still prevail. And item B, if the completion of the sale is prevented by a party to the transaction other than the seller, let's say the buyer was in breach of the agreement and it was an egregious breach. And it was so bad that the seller decided to sue the buyer because it caused financial harm to the seller. And the seller prevailed and they got a settlement. Well, since the seller got a settlement, we would get an amount equal to the lesser of 1/2 of the damages recovered of the above compensation after first deducting title, escrow expenses, and the expenses of collection, if any. So we don't get the full commission, but we get a pre-calculated commission. And then item C, in addition, seller agrees to pay broker. So here's where you could actually do the additional, they want to give you a bonus or they want to do a buyer bonus. You can put it up here or you can put it here. Okay. Then item D, seller has been advised of broker's policy regarding cooperation with the amount of compensation offered to other brokers, and brokers authorized to cooperate with and compensate brokers participating through the multiple listing service MLS by offering, and we're going to check 3% because we took the full 6%, right? So we're going to
let me add something to 3D.
Hold on, Mark. So we're going to collect the full 6%, and then we're going to give 3% to the other side. Okay. Now, Mark, tell them what you see with mistakes all the time, and then go ahead.
I think the key thing here that listing agents have to keep in mind is what it says there in 3D. On line 3D1, brokers authorized to cooperate with and compensate brokers. That means our brokerage is compensating someone else. And then it goes on to say by offering to MLS brokers out of brokers compensation defined or specified in 3A. So what that means is that 3A has to be the sum of the listing broker compensation and the cooperating broker compensation. So if it's like in this example, 6%, it's 3% each. The seller is not paying 9%, they're only paying 3% or 6%. And half of that, in this example, 3%, is going to the cooperating broker, and the seller is not paying that. The listing broker is paying it to the cooperating broker. So that is frequently misunderstood. And you see this 3-3, and effectively that means you're giving away 100% of the commission that you're going to collect to the cooperating broker if it was like that, 3-3. So it has to be the sum of 3D and the listing broker compensation. That's what appears in 3A. So 6% should be in 3A.
And a question is always asked, you're going to take a listing at a full 6%, and then you're going to cooperate with another broker half. You don't have to do half. You could do 2.5, and you keep 3.5.
That's a strategy, the listing agent strategy with the seller. So, if the seller really wants this property to sell, you could have that conversation with the seller and say, well, why don't we offer 3.5% to this cooperating broker? That's going to get us more traffic, more offers, because it's a higher than normal cooperating broker amount. And so that could be a strategy that you use with the seller to, incentivize buyer's agents to bring offers. Typically, it's going to be split 50-50.
Just make sure you don't put 3% here and 3% here. Otherwise, you're working for free.
Yeah.
Then another strategy that we see a lot is if we represent a buyer, and it's always outlined wrong in the listing agreement that the agent's attempting to double in the transaction. So we have specific language. If you, let's say you feel that if you can bring a buyer, then the seller, and this is a strategy with the seller, you're trying to get their listing. Like, look, if we bring a buyer, if I bring a buyer instead of 6%, you'll pay me 4%. I'll do both sides. Again, dual agency by a single agent is allowed at our office as long as we have specific things set up to protect you. But we have very specific language because the way agents write it in the contract is wrong, because they will specifically put their name. If I represent the buyer, well, it's not the agent that's the representative, it's the brokerage that's the representative. So we have specific language on how to do that. If you ever need to do that, see us first and we'll give you that language.
Yeah, there's things where language I've seen, like, if the listing agent brings the buyer, well, what the heck does that mean? Brings the buyer. I mean, does that mean I bring him from Coldwell Banker's agent, or I bring him from, another agent in our office? What does it mean? It's really unclear, and that can cost you money.
So here's the moral of it. If you're attempting to modify a contract with your language, come to the experts first, because maybe we have the language that will actually make sure you get paid. Okay, next section. Section E, you'll see this in everything. Seller hereby irrevocably assigns the broker the compensation. That's in every contract, even the BRE as well as the purchase agreement. Item F, seller represents the seller is not previously entered into a listing agreement with another broker regarding the property unless specified as follows. So this is a protection for the seller. So if you're working the expired market, you'll need to know if that seller's home had expired, and if that seller is due to pay a commission to that expired listing agent under certain terms. So you'll need to know that, because you can break that out here and say, okay, you've entered into an agreement with Remax and you still owe them. So if they still sell the house from one of those buyers that they brought you, then we'll exclude them from this listing agreement. So it's more protection for the seller. And then seller warrants that seller has no obligation to pay compensation to any other broker unless the property is transferred to an individual or entity. So where this will happen is somebody wants to list a home, but they also say, you know what, my nephew wants to buy this property and he's not quite sure if he can do it. He's going through the qualification process. But we really want to get this home on the market. Even if he can't do it, we still want to get it sold. But if he wants to buy it, we'd rather just sell it to him. So you could break out the nephew and put his name there. In other words, great. If your nephew gets qualified and can buy the property, we'll back off and you've got the listing. But we're not, and then the next section will apply. If the property is sold to anyone listed above during the time the seller is obligated to compensate another broker, then we're not entitled to commission and we're not obligated to represent you in that transaction. So that's what those 3 items mean, okay? Item excluded, included. So excluded would be anything that's considered, so remember there's 2 types of property, personal and real. Real property is affixed to the land. Personal is movable. Real property could include stuff like wall mounts for TVs, grandma's chandelier in the living room, in the dining room, anything that's affixed, that's attached to the land. Well, let's say the seller wants to exclude grandma's chandelier. They want to exclude a water fountain that's built in. That's where it would be. You spell that out here in the excluded, and then the included would be anything that maybe they wanted to leave, like maybe they want to leave something that's quasi, could it be real or personal? You can put that here. You also spell out appliances. Appliances like refrigerators, washers, dryers, because refrigerators, washers, and dryers are considered personal. But some refrigerators can be real, like a built-in Sub-Zero. So you really want to define the terms here so you have clarity. The worst thing is if you don't have clarity and then you put in the MLS that's why the seller wants to review that MLS printout, because maybe you put the washer and dryer, but you didn't include it in here or exclude it here, it was excluded, then that's where that's that checks and balances. And then all of a sudden you've got to sell a house with a washer dryer and the seller says, I didn't tell you I wanted to sell it with a washer and dryer. Well, guess who's buying the washer and dryer? Matthew Sadusky out of his real estate commission he just got. And I can tell you, we have multiple agents in our office that knows the appliance store all too well. And it only takes once to learn. That's why we talk about it here. So spell out with clarity what's included, excluded. Leased or not owned items and liened items in section B1 and 2. So leased or not owned. If it's a house and you drive up to the house and you see these sparkly panels on a roof, it's probably a solar system. Matter of fact, prior to your listing appointment and your pre-listing questionnaire, you're going to ask them, hey, Mr. Seller, do you have a solar system? Do you have an alarm system? You rarely ask if they have a propane tank, but if it's in the country, you might want to ask that. If they have a water softener, any other items that they lease or they don't own, they're paying on a lease. And then if it's a liened item, meaning they're buying it, they're making payments on it. Same things apply. Solar systems, windows or doors, heating, ventilation, air conditioning. You need to know that prior to the listing appointment, and you need to know it before you put it on the market, because if it's a solar system that's leased or liened, you're going to need to know how that solar system conveys and what are the terms. Does it have to be paid off? Can a buyer assume it? And if the buyer assumes it, what did it take to assume it? So this is really good for you to get your escrow open up with A+ escrow first, because they can go to work for you by helping get those documents gathered and then figuring out what it takes to convey that property with that leased or liened. And this is a hotbed issue right now because escrow is pulling their hair out, because all these solar systems have all these multiple types of leased and lien properties, and it is just a mess. So make sure you tell the seller, when I come out to visit, we'll need a copy of all the documents of your solar system or anything you're leasing or you're making payments on, and what are the terms for the new buyer to come in if they want to buy the property. Section 5 talks about multiple listing service. So this basically is, what's the MLS? Well, we all know what that is, but it's putting the notice on the seller about, okay, here's the MLS. We're going to put your property in the MLS. We're going to submit it to the price and terms that we agree to, and it's going to go out to the internet. And here's what we're required to provide the MLS. Once we close the sale of the property, that's in section B. And then we specify what our broker's MLS is, and that's the STMLS if you're with STMLS. And we do have a few people with North County and South Bay. So if you're with one of those, you would put that in there. But for the most part, it'll be STMLS. And then item 6 talks about the benefit of using the MLS and impacting of opting out of the MLS. So this is talked a lot about with risk management because we have a lot, that we have the new clear cooperation policy with that took place this year. But some sellers, some sellers don't want to be on the MLS. Maybe they're famous person, or they just don't want their neighbors to know their home is for sale or whatever reason. They could opt out of the MLS, but they have to give authority for us to do that. But this section basically talks about what the benefits of using the MLS and the exposure it will give, because it's going to go out to all the public domain. And then once it's out in the public domain, we don't have any control over what that information or where it goes. 7 talks about that clear cooperation policy. Our MLS rules do require that so you'll never check that box. And if the seller is instructing you to hold it off of the MLS and put it in coming soon status, then what you're going to do is section D here, seller instructs broker to market the property to the public and start marketing on the beginning date of this date or agreement. So let's say you want to hold it off the market until Friday the 31st. You would put that in there. And then what will happen is you're going to have the last form we'll go over is the SELM, seller authorization to exclude listing from the MLS. Or if they don't even want it on the MLS, then you would check this box right here. Very rare that a seller will not put on the MLS, but it's a case-by-case basis, but you'll rarely check that box right there. And then whether 7D1 or 7D2 is selected, seller understands, agrees that should any public marketing of the property occur, the property listing will be submitted to the MLS within 1 business day. So if you have a listing that you have and it's excluded from the MLS, the day you start marketing to the public on social media and flyers, etc., it has to be in the MLS within 24 hours. And then you'll never check F, because clear cooperation policy does always apply with our office. And then MLS data on the internet, section 8. So MLS data basically, we give the information to the MLS, and we could opt out of certain things, but if we opt out, it's not going to go to sites like Trulia and Zillow and Realtor and all those websites, which every seller wants. Matter of fact, sellers get mad when they don't see their listing on Zillow because they want it marketed. But this whole section talks about the MLS data on the MLS, and then once it goes out to that third-party site, like Zillow, we don't have control of that information anymore. Zillow does. So we can't really demand that Zillow change anything, but it's only the information that we're giving them. This section right here, the automated estimated value. So that's the Zestimate. Well, the only way for that not to happen on the MLS is if they completely opt out. And they obviously want their home on Zillow. So unfortunately, without the Zestimate, most sellers will get mad about the Zestimate because it's not as accurate as they think it should be. Item 9 talks about the sellers representing, unless they're completely unaware that there's no defaults on the property, there's no delinquent amounts, it's not in bankruptcy, there's no litigation or arbitration pending, or anything else that will affect the sale of the property or to transfer it, or they're not aware of any current or pending or proposed special assessments affecting the property. And then just like the BRE, where it gets to the brokers and sellers' duties, I'm not going to read everything in there, but this is basically the broker's job description. But what I will cover in here is section C and D. I'll cover B. So A is your job, your duty, your basically your job requirement. B, this requires us to present all offers that we receive on this property to the seller and present them as soon as possible, unless the seller gives the broker written instructions to the contrary. C talks about seller agrees to consider offers presented by broker and to act in good faith to accomplish the sale of the property, and among other things, by making the property available for showing at reasonable times and referring all of the brokers or inquiries to us if they know that somebody's interested. And that the seller is responsible for determining at what price to list and sell the property. We'll help them, but we don't want to set the price. And D's a really helpful paragraph if you start using this, is investigations and reports. So seller agrees within 5 days of the beginning date of this agreement to pay for and get pre-sale reports. So what would be a good case for a pre-sale report? Well, one could be a pest control and a general property inspection. So by checking those two boxes, and this is a good way and a strategy to take your listings, especially on older homes in North Park, South Park, Mission Hills. You know, we live in an area that has older homes that were built in the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s. In order to determine anything that might come up during escrow after a buyer goes and gets their reports, it would be a good idea to deliver some reports from an independent third-party inspector. That shows what they said was wrong with the property. And then you definitely want to get a termite report, because then you determine whether or not there's going to be some termite work that would need to be done to get the property sold. So how does this play out? When a buyer makes an offer on a property, they're doing it blind 90% of the time. And then they go do their own inspections. But if a seller had a report, the termite report and the general property inspection to give to that buyer before they even make the offer, then that buyer is making the offer based upon what they're seeing in reports that they've already seen, and they're not getting it through escrow. And this could save a lot of escrows from falling out. It can also save a lot of buyers from asking for unnecessary price adjustments because they made the initial offer knowing that it needed termite work of $3,000 and it also needed $5,000 worth of repairs. Those repairs are already built into their offer. And then you'll save your seller money if they spend a little money up front. On the back end, they could easily save about $3,000 to $5,000. So I would love it if you guys always get a termite report on your homes as well as a property inspection on, especially if it's an older home. You don't necessarily need a termite report on a condo, because most condos, all that's covered through the HOA. Section E is your hold harmless. It's in every contract that basically says the seller will hold us harmless if they screw up and don't tell everything about the property. Deposit doesn't apply to us, but this is talking about deposits on the seller's behalf. We don't trust fund, trust log. 12 talks about agency relationships again. I'm not going to go through that because we've already discussed it, but this just reconfirms agency within the listing agreement. Security insurance, showings, audio and video. This section talks about making sure the seller has they have insurance on the property in case buyers come in, you know, in case they fall and break a leg. But the most important part in here is about audio and video. It puts the seller on notice, especially in today's world where everybody has smart homes and video cameras and what do you call those Amazon things?
Voice activated assistants.
Yeah. Well, it's basically putting the seller on notice that if you have equipment that is recording audio or visual audio or visual devices in your house, then the responsibility is to you to make sure you make anybody that enters the home aware of that. So putting up a sign. The seller's advised to post notice disclosing the existing of security devices. So if that's why you see homes that will have little signs in the front yard, monitored by ADT. Well, in the state of California, it's illegal in the state of California to videotape somebody without their permission. So important for the seller to put people on notice that they may or may not be videotaped. And this is happening a lot more because a lot of dumbass agents are talking with their buyers about strategy for putting an offer in on the property in the house that the seller is recording and listening back. And then they're getting caught. So just know, be aware, if you have a buyer you're taking through a house, ask the listing agent, are there any recording or audio devices that the seller is accessing? And it's happening a lot. The Ring devices, that's what I'm thinking of. 14 talks about photographs and internet advertising. So this basically tells us that, hey, we're going to take pictures of your home, we're going to put it on MLS, and it's going to be syndicated out to the interwebs. By the way, when it goes out to the interwebs, we don't have control over it. But this is how we're going to get your home marketed. Or unless you want to check these boxes and the seller says, no, I don't want it to go out to the interweb, you're going to check those boxes and not publish on the MLS. "15, key safe lockbox. This allows you permission, the broker permission to put a lockbox on the property. Or if checked, does not allow. So if they don't want a lockbox and they want you there for our showings, good luck. Seller does. Item 16, authorize a broker to install a for sale sold sign on the property. 17, equal housing opportunity, a very important paragraph section. I'm baffled that it's buried at the end, but this property is offered in compliance with federal, state, and local anti-discrimination laws. And then attorney fees, template again. If we end up going to court over this, the one that prevails is going to pay, will have the attorney fees paid by the other one. Additional terms. This is where you'll add additional advisories or listing advisories or short sale advisories. For now, what we have is auto-loaded the KWSTM affiliated business disclosure and the market conditions advisory. Mark, can you explain the affiliate business disclosure?
I have to unmute myself.
Yes.
When a brokerage has a relationship, business relationship with another company, like a title or escrow company, and a brokerage derives income from that relationship, that relationship has to be disclosed to potential clients, buyers and sellers, prior to them signing a contract. And that disclosure needs to be made whether or not that service is being used. And if you don't make that disclosure, it's a RESPA violation. So Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act violation. So we're only disclosing the relationship between the two companies, that there is a business relationship between the two companies. The form does not obligate anyone to use the service. It just makes them aware of the relationship. So please don't remove that item from this section. The second one, market conditions advisory, same thing. It's kind of like what we were talking about at the onset with the CMA and the estimated seller's proceeds. You're advising the seller of things before they enter into a contract so that they can't say, gee, you never told me about fluctuating market conditions, or you never told me that that was a cost. So again, please don't remove this from that section, thinking that it can just be done later. It really serves no purpose whatsoever. It basically becomes meaningless if you give the MCA to someone after they've already signed the contract. Same with the ABA. And this particular template we're looking at right now doesn't show those additional forms, but there are a couple of coronavirus related forms that are pre-added into that section too.
So let's move through this because we're running over time.
Right.
Management approval. This is where you have to send in your new listing because Mark has to review it. Dispute resolution, mediation, arbitration, or mediation. So if we end up with a dispute with the seller, we're both agreeing to go to mediation to hash it out. 23 is the entire agreement. And then ownership and title, this basically warrants that the seller is the owner of the property and no other persons have title to the property. And the seller has the authority to execute unless you have the RCSD, where you'll check that box right there, RCSD-S, which we covered at the very beginning.
24 still applies even if you have RCSD checked, because the seller, the representative is saying, I have the ability to sign on this contract and sell this property. So the 20, if you can scroll up a little bit, 24 is basically saying that they have the authority to do so. If there's multiple owners and they designate one person to be the seller, the signer, that's what 24 is really addressing.
And then down here is the signature block. 2 sellers is what it's templated for, but if there's more than 2, then you'll check this box right here and then it'll pop in the ASA, additional signature addendum, if there's 3 or 4 sellers. And then down here, you'll fill in all the information, which I didn't fill in because I just preloaded this, but you got to fill out this whole section with the address, the city, the state, and your DRE, our DRE number. And then you'll put your DRE numbers down here. And the seller advisory, same thing, like the buyer advisory when we did the BRE. This is basically saying, hey, Mr. Seller, you're selling your home. By the way, here's your job description. You're supposed to give disclosures, general disclosures, and then statutory duties, meaning required by law in order for you to sell your house. So the seller is obligated to give these documents in order to sell their house. And this lists everything that they're supposed to be doing. I'm not going to go through everything, but this is basically the seller's job duty once they start getting to sell the house. And then we discussed the CCPA on the other call, but this is the new law code that was enacted this year to basically protect consumers' information, is really what this is about, and that we ascribe to doing that. Now we're missing a couple forms. In addition to all the other stuff, you're also going to get the RLACAA. Mark, did they take out the coronavirus section? They did. So during COVID, you're going to also add the RLACAA. And then Mark, where's the PRE?
You mean the PEAD?
No, the PRE.
Oh, the PRE. It actually is preloaded into new listing transactions. So,
oh, so it is. Okay.
You start a new listing transaction. Why don't you just do that? Just start it. Go to transaction.
I'll do it the next one. This is moving slow today.
I know we're a little bit over time, so.
Okay. So it's preloaded. So if you do a brand new listing today, it'll go through and redo it. But it's the PRE, which is the pictogram that you post in every listing. and then the PEAD for the seller, PEAD-S. All right, I think that's it for today. We had a lot of great questions today. Does anybody else have any questions? I see we had people drop off. They must be falling asleep. Matt's still here.
Russ had posted a question in the chat, which was, what sign do we put in a house to disclose if there are any recording devices? And I don't know that there is. I'm trying
anything. You can make it up on a just a piece of paper, sign.
I think
anything.
You could put it in the MLS in confidential remarks, or, you know, would that be a possibility?
No, it has to be posted at the property.
I'll post it. Okay.
Yeah, they have to see it posted at the property.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So just make up a sign, Russ, says you're being recorded, mother bitches. All right, guys, that's it for the day. Y'all go have a great day and go get new listings, okay? Bye.
Thanks, everyone.